Hello and good morning. So today we're talking about American imperialism in the Caribbean region. So the Spanish American War had given the United States direct control of Puerto Rico, right here, and indirect control of Cuba. Um, this only increased American interest in this Caribbean region. So there's several reasons now for this interest in this region. Um, First off, would be hemispheric security. Um, United States basically wanted to keep foreign powers out of the Caribbean because they might pose a threat to us. Uh, there's also the economic interests. Um, this is an important supplier of goods, and it's good investments for the United States. And then lastly, we needed a canal. The Spanish American War demonstrated that we needed a two ocean navy. Um, so, the best way to achieve this is to make a canal through Central America. So, these are the reasons the United States is interested in this Caribbean region in those years after the Spanish American War. So, let's flip back over to Puerto Rico for a second. Um, Puerto Rico is a very small island in the Caribbean Sea, 100 miles long by 35 miles wide. This becomes an American possession after the Spanish American War, after we defeat Spain in 1898. Um, in May of 1900, the United States establishes a civil government there. And if you are born in Puerto Rico, to this day, you are a U.S. citizen. Now, you can't vote in the general election, though. But you can vote in primary elections. Um, Now, we will probably see in our lifetime this become Puerto Rico the 51st state. And it's been on the ballot as an initiative several times, and it's been close. So, this is something to look out for with Puerto Rico during your lifetimes. Um, and then Cuba. Um, this is where we talked about indirect control, right? We had direct control after the Spanish American War of Puerto Rico. Uh, Cuba, we have indirect control. And so let's talk about that. Cuba is the largest island in the Caribbean, and Congress passed what was known as the Teller Amendment before war with Spain, and they promised not to annex or take Cuba. Instead, Cuba becomes a protectorate. It is That means that it is under American control, but they still maintain their independence. So, U.S. forces are going to remain on the island of Cuba, and American businesses are going to heavily invest in the island. Um, Now, when I say that Cuba came under indirect control, Cubans were forced to agree to the Platt Amendment. And the Platt Amendment states that Americans have the right to interfere in Cuban affairs for any reason at any time. Um, so this isn't necessarily fair, but the military would not leave Cuba without forcing them to put the Platt Amendment inside Cuba's constitution. Um, Moving over to the Panama Canal. Um, so during the Spanish American War, warships that were in the Pacific Fleet had to sail 16,000 miles around the tip of South America. So, around the tip of South America, all the way around 16,000 miles to reach the Caribbean region here. Now, what happens, and let me go back for just a second here. What happens is that the United States decides to build a canal through Panama. But the only problem here is that Panama is part of Colombia. Now, Colombia does not want to negotiate very much with America on letting us build a canal through their territory. So, what ends up happening here is Roosevelt negotiates and forms a deal with Panamanian rebels who want their independence from Colombia. Now, why would Roosevelt support this? He sends gunships down there to help support uh, this war against Colombia for Panamanian independence. Well, because after the Panamanians win their independence, the new government of Panama is going to give the U.S. complete control of a 10-mile strip of rainforest through the center of Panama, and this is known as the Panama Canal Zone. Um, so that's how the United States ended up with this 10-mile strip to build a canal in Central America. Now, this, so Roosevelt orders the building of this canal at once. And the construction of its 51-mile length is going to take 10 years. And there's going to be several challenges here with building this thing. It takes 10 years to complete. It has to have these giant locks because the canal crossed these different landforms and they're different elevations. So another challenge here is Panama has a tropical climate. You're going to have mountains to cut through, mudslides to deal with, heavy rains, dense rainforests, a disease called yellow fever, which is spread by mosquitoes. So you've got all these challenges here. And speaking of mosquitoes, Dr. Walter Reed had just discovered that yellow fever was spread by these mosquitoes. And so to reduce that threat, the guy in charge here, Dr. William Gorgas, he worked for the Army, he ordered all of the swamps to be drained, all the vegetation to be cut down, all standing water to be sprayed with oil so that mosquito larvae you couldn't have breeding and it would control any new mosquito larvae. So Dr. Walter Reed and Dr. William Gorgas. And so you see here the Panama Canal, newly formed Panama. 1914, the canal opens, and we have a two-ocean navy. So let's move on to seeing the Caribbean as an American lake. So the Monroe Doctrine had prevented Europeans from establishing new colonies in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine goes way back to President Monroe, 1823. And basically, it was to protect American interests and keep Europeans from establishing new colonies in this hemisphere, on this side of the world. So in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries, where we're focused on in this unit, American governments are going to extend this policy. And they're going to do that by intervening in the Caribbean. And this is all to protect American interests. All right, so stick with me. A lot of words on this slide. In 1904, Roosevelt barred European countries from using force to collect debts owed to them by the Dominican Republic. So Roosevelt declared that the United States would collect these debts for them, and we would act as an international police power. He calls this foreign policy the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. A corollary is like an add-on, an extra. So it says not only can you not, as European powers, establish new colonies in the Western Hemisphere, we are going to act as an international police power, and we will collect debts that are owed to you for you, but you will not come over here. This is our half of the world. And so this becomes known as the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. More popularly, it becomes known as the Big Stick policy, since Roosevelt once boasted he would walk softly and carry a big stick. The corollary was often used to justify sending U.S. troops to the West Indies and Central America. And these interventions are going to be deeply resented by Latin Americans even to this day. We had interventions in Haiti, in Nicaragua, in Honduras, the Dominican Republic. And so you can see this political cartoon of Roosevelt strolling across the Caribbean. He's seeing the Caribbean as an American lake, right? Carrying his big stick with him. Um, and this has a lot to do with the big stick policy, or the Roosevelt corollary. All right, so that was Roosevelt's. Um, that is how Roosevelt dealt with foreign policy. So after Roosevelt, going down the list of progressive presidents, we got Roosevelt and then Taft. Taft handled things a little bit differently. Taft encouraged bankers to invest in the Caribbean, and he wanted to use American investment to promote our foreign policy goals, and this became known as dollar diplomacy. So, if a Latin American country could not pay its loans on time, the U.S. government then sent troops to make sure the money was repaid. For example, U.S. bankers lent money to Nicaragua, and the government had trouble making its loan repayments. The government of Nicaragua and U.S. bankers sought control of Nicaragua's railroads, their custom duties, their national bank. Of course, the Nicaraguans don't agree with this, and the government refuses to agree, and Taft sends in the Marines. So Taft tried to use investment and dollars as his foreign policy. So Wilson, Roosevelt corollary, big stick policy. Taft, dollar diplomacy. And you can see here President Taft's dollar diplomacy. He does have his hand on Roosevelt's big stick, but he's saying, go invest in Latin America with the full face of the U.S. government, ... and its military. And you got all these guys waiting to invest. This guy's hat says U.S. Steel. Ooh, Standard Oil. That looks like Rockefeller. So dollar diplomacy was Taft's approach to this. And the next president, of course, is President Woodrow Wilson. And Wilson wants his policy to be different than these guys. He doesn't want to be such a bully. President Wilson wanted to distinguish his presidents from these bullying tactics. But events soon prevent him from keeping this promise of not being a bully. Wilson quickly follows the pattern of the other two guys. He sends troops to Haiti, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. And he expanded America's colonial empire by purchasing the Virgin Islands from Denmark in 1917. So Mexico is already undergoing the Mexican Revolution at this time. It's a violent revolution, and this happens when Woodrow Wilson became president. And Wilson doesn't want to recognize this new government of Mexico. And this new government of Mexico had seized power through violence. And so instead of recognizing Mexico's new government, he adopted this policy of watchful waiting. So when troops of rebel leader Pancho Villa murdered Americans in New Mexico and then retreated back across the border of Mexico, Wilson reacts. So he doesn't want to be a bully, but he gets involved. He sent the American Expeditionary Force under a general named John J. Pershing to apprehend Pancho Villa, but Pershing never captures Pancho Villa. Wilson has to finally withdraw these troops from Mexico when America enters World War I, because those troops were needed in Europe. Anyway, thank you for listening, guys, and have a wonderful day.